I have very strong feelings regarding mosquitoes, and those feelings are that they're the worst. Those creepy little legs of theirs, the high-pitched buzzing, the whole blood-sucking thing, yuck. The worst part, though, is that mosquitoes and other bugs like ticks carry a range of pathogens that cause diseases all around the world. I study one specific group of those pathogens. It's a family of viruses that includes Zika, dengue, and West Nile, and a bunch of others. Now, these viruses infect millions of people every year, and yet we still don't have effective ways to prevent and treat most of them. In particular, dengue virus infects close to 400 million people every year and has been identified in over half of the US states. But we still don't know enough about the very basic ways that it infects our cells and makes us sick. And so we don't have the knowledge we need to develop effective vaccines or specific medicines to treat it. So I'm working to better understand how this virus functions inside of our cells so that we have new and more effective strategies to try and stop it. Now, the members of this family of viruses, called flaviviruses, are all related by their genome composition. And whereas we usually think of genetic material as DNA, right? It's a double-stranded helix. These viruses encode all of their genes with a molecule called RNA. And RNA and DNA are similar in many ways, but like DNA is double-stranded, RNA is actually single-stranded. And that single-strandedness of RNA gives it the flexibility to fold into what are basically knots made of molecules. Now, those knots can serve a variety of functions, but for the flaviviruses, they have one particularly important role. But before I get into that, you need to know about the host side, about our side of things as well. Because inside all animal cells, all of them, there's an enzyme whose only job is to degrade or chew up RNA. It goes around kind of like Pac-Man, but instead of chewing up those little white circles, it chews up RNA. And it'll chew up the virus's RNA as well, but only up until a certain point, because that's the role for those knots that I was talking about. They stop the Pac-Man enzyme from further chewing up the virus's RNA. So then we're left with a bunch of fragments of the virus that are just floating around inside the cell, and it turns out that those pieces of the virus are really important for infection, and that these viruses, if they can't fold those knots and then make those pieces, they can't cause a severe infection. So we know that these RNA knots are really important for these viruses. But even though these viruses are all related, they're definitely not identical. And some are so different that we didn't know whether they'd even be able to fold those knots in the first place. And so what I wanted to know was whether or not, one, all of these flaviviruses like dengue and Zika could fold these knots, and two, if so, would they all look the same, or would they be different shapes and different types of knots? So to answer those questions, I took the RNA genomes from a bunch of different flaviviruses, and I did some chemistry with them, I made some mutations, and I did some computer analysis to look at the shape of their knots. And so what I found was that not only can all the viruses, all the flaviviruses, fold those knots, but there's actually two distinct shapes of knots. And that's really cool because even though these knots look different, they're still serving the same very critical function of stopping that Pac-Man enzyme and producing those pieces of viral genome that cause a severe infection. And so today, I told you quite a bit about the different ways that viruses like dengue and Zika can fold themselves into knots to enhance infection. And while we still don't completely understand how these viruses function to make people so sick, I can definitively say that now that we know more about how these knots and how these viruses fold those knots that are so critical, we have another target to go after in our continued quest for better vaccines and medicines to treat the diseases that these viruses cause. Thank you.